The recording date is May 16th, 2007. The CPI report, Child Protection in Iowa, brought to you by Vocal, Victims of Child Abuse Laws. The program is aired on Mediacom Channel 15 Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock. Again, it's repeated Wednesday evening at 9:30. You can email us at vocaliowa@mchsi.com. My telephone number that you can contact if, as a parent, you're having questions about what the DHS is doing, or you've just received a letter in the mail or something from DHS, would try to give you some advice. My number is 276-3956, and John's number is 282-2672. The area code is 515. My name is Don Burgmaier, and with me at the control is my co-host,
John Harvey, and welcome to the CPI report. CPI, that stands for Child Protection in Iowa. And we do attempt to give hints to people that would like to give us a call. And we're not attorneys. We don't hold ourselves out to practice law before the bar. But we can, of course, provide information that may be of help to you, and we encourage you to do that. We've given some attention to one family because of the fact that the court system has caused some amazing difficulties. And I'll talk a little more about that after Don has read a story that was in the editorial section of the Des Moines Register not long ago, and that story had to do with a good mother who lost her child. Do you have that story ready, Don? We're going to, and the question that was asked in the story is, were the courts fair? And we'll be talking when he has presented that story. We may interrupt him from time to time because there are some errors in the story. I think that Rekha Basu did a good job, an objective job of working on the program, or working on that story, and did a fairly accurate job of detailing what was going on there. Well, Don, we'll turn now to Don. He's going to read that story. You see, it's a story that has progressed over many years, more than 2 years anyhow.
oh, close to 4 years we've known about it.
Correct, and it has wound up where we have a sweet little girl being taken from a good mother. Now, what kind of a system is it that permits that? Is that a fair system? Don?
It's entitled, Were Courts Fair to Mom Alleging Sex Abuse of Child? A Des Moines mother alleged, in a court's view, too doggedly, that her young daughter was being sexually abused by the child's father. What ultimately happened could be straight out of Kafka. The mother lost her parental rights while the accused father got full custody. Two different courts ruled several times, each to that end. The case is complicated. The mother was obstinate, overprotective, and confrontive. The court called it obsessive.
You see a lot of those criticisms, Don, when they say things like that. They're trying to put across a point, but those kinds of points do not work in a good court system, because being obstinate, overprotective, and so forth are not in violation of the law. And if people view her as being obstinate, that is not something that she can be charged for. And sometimes they forget things like that. In fact, I think later on down the story they talk about Munchausen by proxy, and of course those have certain elements to it. Those elements weren't present in this case, but it didn't keep the authorities from using the terminology. Don, we'll get back to the story. Sorry to interrupt you at that point.
We mentioned overprotective, John, but what about a parent that is underprotective? The DHS jumps on them too.
That'll get them an assessment
A+?
for being unprotective. Yeah, you bet.
F maybe.
Right.
In school. Wailing as the it goes on here to say she went too far by examining the child's genitals herself.
Excuse me, she didn't examine them. She took pictures, but she did not examine them.
She's not a doctor, is
No.
she? She's a
No.
mother.
Yeah.
But no one contests that she was a good, nurturing mother who was not mentally ill and had a close bond with her daughter and her two sons from a previous marriage. The father, on the other hand, has had questionable past interactions with females, including domestic documented violence against the mother. The child, identified in court papers as TD, was born in 2001 to mother WLC and father Richard. The parents divorced soon after. The mom got physical custody and the father had visitation. When the child was 2, the mother said her daughter repeatedly told her that daddy put fingers in there, quote unquote. On advice from her transitional housing coordinator, the mother called the child abuse hotline and began taking the child for weekly therapy sessions. The state's child abuse specialist, Dr. Rizwan Shah, later examined the child and found no signs of sexual abuse, though experts say lascivious acts such as these don't necessarily leave physical evidence. In subsequent months, a hospital doctor would note an internal abrasion to the child's labia. The child's therapist would say she had described her father performing oral sex on her. A police officer would say she told him her father had put his fingers on her crotch. A different therapist would report she talked repeatedly about, quote, licking, unquote. After the State Department of Human Services determined there was no sexual abuse, the mother would continue to make allegations to DHS, law enforcement, and medical providers, saying the child was being led by a mother shopping for a therapist to support her allegations. DHS petitioned to have the girl declared a child in need of assistance. That means they filed a document in court to get court action on this situation when they petitioned to have the girl declared a child in need of assistance.
Means a ward of the court.
The court agreed in February 2005, but left her temporarily in her mother's custody. Juvenile court judge Carla Faltz ordered the mother not to take her daughter to any doctor if she suspected abuse. What ultimately caused Judge Faltz this March to terminate the mother's rights was her filming the child's genitals, though the pictures led Shaw to notice something of concern and recommend another examination. That yielded no evidence of abuse, though the same pictures led the mother's expert witness to conclude with 99.9% certainty that there had been. The same evidence Faltz deemed not credible was credible to appeals court judge. Can you pronounce that name,
I'm
John?
not sure. I call it Vaseron, but I could be wrong on that.
That's in the, well, anyway.
Iowa Court of Appeals.
Iowa Court of Appeals, who wrote a dissenting opinion against removal of the child from her mother. Vaseron authored a subsequent ruling in December 2006, affirming the earlier ruling that there had been no change of circumstances. She noted the mother had violated an order to quit examining the
That was wrong too. She hadn't violated any order.
child's genitals or obtain photos of her genitalia.
I should interrupt there too, because while the account here is fairly accurate, the mother here was not. Well, she was accused. In fact, they tried to bring a contempt of court action against the mother, and then they say, well, but if you sign this and do this and this and this, then we won't send you to trial. And she said no, she isn't going to sign anything. She isn't going to make any agreements of that sort while she's in court. She's going to present her evidence, and then they finally dropped the contempt charge. They just were using that as an excuse to get her, and it was a ruse. This whole idea that she had somehow violated a court order. What she was doing is that she was attempting to get information from her documentation, which she has a right to do, to her expert witnesses. And she did it without violation of any court order. There. Done?
I'll continue on here. She noted the mother had violated an order to quit examining the child's genitals or obtain photos of her genitalia. Yes, there was an order went out, wasn't there? And
Yeah.
she was found innocent on that, wasn't she?
No, they just didn't proceed with the contempt charges.
Well, what would you recommend other parents listening to this and realizing that they have a concern for their own children and get photos, try to prove, have pictures of their child in the nude? Is that constitutionally wrong, John?
There certainly hasn't been any statute or any constitutional provision to keep somebody from going to a long extent in protecting their child. Go ahead.
The case is being appealed to the state Supreme Court. The mother is Asian and a client of Monsoon, the Des Moines organization to support battered Asian women. Monsoon has written Governor Chet Culver saying the rights of the mother and child have been violated by DHS and the courts. Maybe most alarming was the court's willingness to overlook the father's domestic assault against the mother. as evidenced by a restraining order she obtained after the divorce. In an interview, the mother said the violence included a punch in the mouth, a blow to her head, and the words, "You're dead." The father denied ever abusing his wife or daughter. There are other red flags. A January 2005 DHS report said the father admits to secretly trying to see women undressed by looking in windows. He told someone during a psychosocial evaluation that he was ordered to attend a group for adult sex offenders after a non-physical 1995 incident involving a 13-year-old girl. The screener deemed the father's response to be false 90% of the time. This information here was, I remember the attorney in the TPR tried to bring that out in court to the attention of Judge Faltz, and Judge Faltz blocked that, didn't she?
That's correct.
He maintains he's a good father and that his daughter is doing very well in his care. The state agrees. Even with all the evidence there against him, the state still agrees. It's easy to get frustrated with a mother who persists in pursuing her suspicions regardless of what she is told. But wouldn't any decent mother who believed her child was being abused be persistent? With even an iota of doubt, why take a chance on an unsupervised living situation? Is it a fair comparison when the court weighs in favor of the parent, more agreeable to maintaining the child's contact with the other parent? Besides, Monsoon, the mother is supported by her transitional housing coordinator, the Iowa Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and a national organization called Justice for Children. Its director says about a third of its cases begin with unresolved allegations of sexual abuse and end up in favor of the alleged abusive parent. One can only hope this case doesn't discourage other parents who suspect sexual abuse from vigorously pursuing their beliefs. Okay, John?
Okay, it would be a tragic shame if there is any even one family that is being falsely accused, and that's one thing that we look out for is these false allegations. And one thing that has been a favorite weapon, particularly from women, because they've been guided in this way from domestic violence shelters and from all other now gang type of ventures, telling them that if they don't cook up some kind of an allegation, they'll lose in divorce court. So it doesn't make any difference whether it's true or false. Go ahead and launch a sexual abuse report. Well, it was in this environment that this particular case came up, in which there was good reason to believe what the mother said was valid. So on the one hand, thousands of fathers have been falsely accused and cut off, and the fathers groups have mentioned this in response to the editorial, and I think that is a tragic shame. It's a tragic shame either way. If a father is being falsely accused because it makes mother look good in court, and she gets all kinds of she gets all kinds of gifts from the judge in terms of her divorce decree and keeping father away and so forth. That's a tragic, tragic situation. And it is against that backdrop, I think, that caused officials to think twice about believing this mother. However, there was evidence weighing in her favor. Now, it is the consideration of evidence that is extremely important. Even if you cannot determine to the fullest extent whether or not an abuse has taken place, consider the evidence. And beware that you're not exposing the child unnecessarily to a greater harm. Another thing that has to be taken into account is something called rule of law. And as we have observed this case and have even seen parts of the trial and have read transcripts and so forth of this case, there was no observance of the rule of law. In this case, it ran amok. And where the rule of law is not administered or not observed, and where the judge doesn't wait to have evidence presented, but dreams up her own, where those two things are missing, we view that as a real disaster. That is where tyranny takes over. Well, we're going to turn now for the balance of this program to hear a presentation of how the Department of Human Services administers its programs and how it proves to government that what it is doing is totally appropriate. They have a few schemes that they've built up on their own and gotten permission from, or they've got their heads together with Kansas City officials, and in doing so have shown themselves to be doing great things on such matters as, is there a reoccurrence of abuse once abuse has taken place? Well, that has been a problem all along, and so they thought, well, we're going to set some goals that there will not be re-abuse as time goes on. So we're going to turn to this lecture by Mary Nelson, who is a top official of the Department of Human Services, as she explains all of these facets to the council for the Department of Human Services. The council is a governor's appointed council. Here now, Mary Nelson. We'll see if we can get her to come up on the screen here.
Topic is Child and Family Service Review. And I thought I know you wanted kind of an update on where we were. I thought it would be good to kind of start us, grounding us in, okay, what is this CFSR, and what the focus is. So I'm going to start with that, and then kind of talk about where we are in relationship to our first CFSR and where we are in relationship to our second CFSR, because we're getting ready for round 2. CFSR, as indicated on the PowerPoint, is a partnership between the federal and state governments focused on child welfare outcomes and what the federal government calls systemic factors, and I think about that as infrastructure, parts of your system that need to be strong in order to get good outcomes. CFSR is the new way for the feds to look at child welfare systems across the country. They've all 50 states go through them over about a 4-year period. So about a quarter of the states are having their CFSR at any one time. The other thing that's really important about as an overview about the CFSR is it's focused on the whole system. So it's not just on the public agency, but it looks at how well is the court system working, the education, mental health, and how physical health, how are they working together to get outcomes on behalf of children that are involved in the child welfare system. If you look at the second page, that lays out the 3 broad outcomes that make up the CFSR, and then there are a couple of statements with each, but the big 3 are safety, permanency.
She said she examined the courts to see if they're doing well. I listened and I didn't hear anything that convinced me that the courts are doing anything well.
Data standards, 23 indicators that they look at the case level that kind of help them determine how we meet these big 3. Okay, so it's broad outcomes, but then some specific issues they look at to see how well a state is doing on each. If you turn to page 3, this identifies at the top the 7 systemic factors. They look at our statewide information system, our case review system, and that includes the court processes and case plans. the quality assurance and improvement system we have, our training, the service array, so what services we have in place, how well we coordinate with the community, and then how we do on licensing, recruiting, and retaining foster parents. The CFSR has 3 phases. There's a statewide assessment, the on-site review, and then a program improvement plan. And I'll kind of go into a little bit what's involved in each of those. So if you turn to page 4, the statewide assessment is the first phase, and it involves getting feedback from virtually everyone involved in the system around how's the system working. So parents, youth, families, caseworkers, tribes are a very important partner. The statewide assessment also includes the analysis of data from our child welfare information system, particularly around how are we doing on our outcomes. And then out of that, we write a report that takes those 3 big outcome categories in the 7 statements and the 7 systemic factors, and we identify what do we see here in Iowa are our strengths in those areas, and what do we see are the areas where we need to make improvement.
So when did we do we did that a couple of years ago?
Yeah, we did our first, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but we did our first CFSR in our first statewide assessment we submitted in February of 2003. So yeah, a little over 4 years ago, we were involved in the statewide assessment phase. And in fact, 4 years ago, we were about to have our on-site. They were here in May of 2003 for our on-site. So then the second phase is the on-site review, which is on the bottom of page 4. And the way that works is teams of federal and state reviewers, state staff come in and they review a sample of cases in 3 sites. One of those sites is always the largest metro area. So until the rules of the game change, Hope will always be part of our on-site. And then the other 2 sites are selected between the federal government and the state government, and you negotiate which 2 sites they'll also look at. Here in the first review, it was Lynn County and Woodbury County.
And does that mean essentially a service area or just
No,
county?
it's typically more, they want at least a certain number of cases, so it's typically going to be in Iowa, one of our urban or mid-sized counties, or if we would pick a rural, we'd probably have to group a couple of counties together.
The county office.
Yeah, but it's some configuration of counties. We picked the first time around Lynn because that was our community partnership site, and we really wanted to see how did they do against the outcomes and the system issues, given we were testing out a model of working with the community there. And then we picked Woodbury in negotiation with the federal government because they were very interested in looking at a community that had a high incidence of Native American population. We had actually originally proposed a more rural county, but we wanted to, Lynn and Polk are both fairly urban for Iowa. And in fact, I think next time that's one of the things we'll look at, because we ended up with 3 of our more urban counties, so we really didn't get as good a look at the rural areas of Iowa. When they're in those 3 sites, they take a look at they pull a sample of cases. In our first review, it was 50 cases statewide. They look at the case record. They interview the major players. That always is going to involve the children, youth, and families that are receiving the services. And then they interview some of the other people involved. They might interview the judge or the providers, but they'll pick someone else, some of the other parties involved in the case, caseworker, etc. And then they also hold focus groups at each of the 3 sites and at the state level. And they get input from, again, key stakeholders. So, and they interviewed people like the head of our Foster and Adoptive Parent Association, the head of our review board, Kevin, myself, and then they did focus groups like with our youth group, and a group of providers, a group of attorneys. And then if you turn to page 5, then. At the end of that on-site review, which is a week in the state, and it's a very intense week, but they're here for a week, and they provide their findings at an exit interview. So initially, we get kind of what their overall sense of their review was, what they saw as strengths and weaknesses, areas needing improvement or weaknesses, and then ultimately we get a final written report. And for each of the seven outcome statements that are clustered in the big three, and each of the systemic factors, they either say we are in substantial conformity or we're not in substantial conformity. One of the other things I might mention that's really positive about the on-site review is that the federal reviewers that come in include both people that actually work for the federal government, but also child welfare, people that are involved in child welfare in other states. So you get the perspectives of people that work in other systems and have other areas of expertise. And for our state reviewers, we also used a mix. We had 2 judges, which was just amazing that we were able to have 2 judges clear their schedules to be part of the review. We had providers, we had tribal representatives, we had foster parents that actually that served as our part of the team, and then some of our own staff. But so that again, that's the second phase. It ultimately ends in a final report from the federal government. Then the third phase is the program improvement plan. And for every item that the state is not in substantial conformity, you have to do a program improvement plan. And that's developed, again, with our state stakeholders. And we say in the program improvement plan or in the PIP, on this particular issue, here are the strategies that we're going to implement to make progress, and here are our performance goals. What interim goals you can measure us to see if we're making improvement. We get 90 days to submit that to our regional office, and for us that's Kansas City. And then the way it works, we have 2 years to actually complete all the strategies, implement everything, the changes we're going to make, and then they measure an additional year to see if we meet our performance goals. So for example, one of the, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but one of the indicators in the well-being outcome is what percentage of our cases have monthly worker visits with the child. And our original performance, and they measured that through the on-site sample, through the case interviews and looking at the records, and our original, they found that in 10% of the cases were we actually having monthly visits with the child. The standard they were holding us to was 90. That's where we need to be. So we had a gap. And that was by far where we struggled, where we had our largest area needing improvement. In our PIP, we identified strategies, things we thought we would do that we thought could improve the frequency of visits. And that included things like trying to reduce some of the other work that staff had to do, reduce paperwork so they could spend more time with kids and families, etc. We also had to set a performance benchmark that we thought we could achieve. And while our ultimate goal was 90, the way this is set up, they recognize you can't necessarily reach where you ultimately need to be in a single PIP or a single year or 2. And so we negotiated we would get up to 27%. So that was the benchmark. So we had 2 years to do all the things we said we'd do, but we had then an additional year to actually see if we could get to 27. I might mention as well, in terms of those final reports and PIPs, no state passed all 7 outcomes statements and all 7 system factors. Not a single state. Iowa was pretty much in the middle of the pack. We passed 2 outcome statements and we passed 3 systemic factors. And that was pretty common, like I said, middle of the pack. So virtually every state was pipping. So if you turn to the top of page 6, there's really the timeline for how our first CFSR went. We completed, as I mentioned earlier, our statewide assessment in February. We had our on-site review in May. We actually got our final report in October, and as I mentioned, we met 2 of the outcomes, the second safety outcome and the educational well-being outcome, and we met 3 of the 7 systemic factors. And then our PIP was approved in August of 2004. And that time intervening was negotiation back and forth. You submit a PIP, they come back and say, do some more here, we like this, we don't like that. But we finally had an approved PIP in 2004, August of 2004, which meant then we had till August of 2005, of six, to implement the strategies, and we had to have till this August to meet our performance measures.
What were the three systemic factors that we did meet?
We met the statewide information system, agency responsiveness to community, and the foster and adoptive parent licensing, recruitment, and retention.
Thank you.
So at the bottom of page 6, I tried to highlight some of the major strategies. One of the things we tried to do, and were encouraged to do, is try to pick strategies that try to identify those aspects that are the kind of give you the most leverage. If you do these things well, then you're likely to improve in a variety of outcomes. And so that's really what we tried to do. The other thing that was very fortunate for us, if you look at those dates, is this was about pretty concurrent with when we were doing the child welfare redesign. So we really use these to go hand in glove. We use the PIP, the federal review to inform the redesign, and then the redesign strategies really are what we negotiated into our PIP. So we really wanted these to be, since the focus was on the same outcomes, we wanted them to be one project, not two different things.
I never realized that a lot.
You're listening to Mary Nelson, one of the top officials at the Department of Human Services, reporting to the
Like I said, the timing was
Council
really
for the
good
Department of
us,
Human
that we had
Services,
the broader interest in having
and
the
she's
child welfare
reporting
redesign
on
at the same time
performance,
that we
a
can
performance
use the data
review
from
for the department.
CSR.
So it's a rather
So,
complicated review,
I'll just
and it's
kinda
taken
highlight a few of the strategies.
along with the federal
We did
government looking over
we developed
the
a
shoulders
model
of the
practice,
department.
and that's been something
This
that
is
we really
Mary
used to
Nelson.
underpin, all of our work in child welfare, but it lays out our values, what we think is important about how we work with kids and families at various stages through the life of the case. It's posted on our website, we train to it, we have a retreat coming up, and all the breakouts will tie back to our model of practice so that we have a real consistent message to our staff around this is what we think is important about working with kids and families. We did the statewide expansion of the community partnerships, and we've talked about that here before. We did the focus on making sure that our staff, that we opened cases on those kids that are youngest and at highest risk, and then we created community care for our lower risk families. We did a lot of work on strengthening our assessment, because if you're going to really reach outcomes, you have to do good, solid assessments at the start of a case, and then make sure your services are matching what you've assessed. We did our work around family team meetings. We implemented the minority youth and family initiatives in Sioux City and Woodbury, and some statewide things. We worked with education and public health around the well-being issues so that we could strengthen our partnership to improve well-being for kids and families that we serve. We really did a lot of work on the role of the supervisors to strengthen their ability to coach and mentor. We added supervisors last year. And then we created a quality assurance system. One of the things that was very clear in our CFSR is that we no longer had a statewide quality assurance system. And if you remember, back when there were a lot of budgets cuts, some of the things that we ended up, in order to preserve frontline staff, we virtually eliminated our quality assurance capacity. We really reduced our training. And one of the things we really saw in our CFSR is you could see that. I mean, in fact, if you look at our final report, one of the things that the reviewers said they heard over and over again, because it was in 2003 and in 2001 is when the revenues went down, as we did a lot of reduction, was we used to have that. We used to have these training courses. Now we don't anymore. We used to have this kind of service available. Now we don't anymore. So it really got us at kind of a low point. But so we rebuilt a lot of and strengthened things like our training system and put into place a quality assurance system where we're routinely monitoring data. and we do case readings now, so we know every quarter supervisors are reading case records and interviewing workers, so we can see on these outcome standards and performance measures, how are we doing? Are we getting better? And then they use this framework in consultation with staff. So we're routinely talking to staff about the importance of face-to-face visits and what needs to happen. And so they supervise to these, they case read for it, so that we're constantly focused on these quality benchmarks. If you turn to page 7, in terms of where we are today, I mentioned earlier, we've had until August of 2006 to complete our PIP, and we did. We got everything completed. And again, just to step back, the way this works as well, I mentioned everything you don't meet the national standard, you have to do program improvement. The other thing that they do is they tell you what your penalty would be. Because there are, in the way this is set up, there are penalties associated with not meeting the outcomes and not meeting the systemic factors. And they tell you in your final report, if you do nothing, this is what you owe the federal government. And those penalties get worse year after year if you do nothing or if you don't meet your PIP. So the first thing you have to do is you have to do every activity you've promised the feds. You've negotiated with them, you do. We completed those in August of 2006. And then, as I mentioned, we had another year to August of 2007 to actually meet our performance measures. And we achieved those with the data we submitted that had covered November of 2006 to 2007. We've met every benchmark that was established in our PIP. And I'm told the letter that will tell us that we've completed our PIP and all our penalties are lifted is making its way through approval process up in the Administration for Children and Families in Washington, D.C. But every time I talk to the regional office, they tell me that letter's coming. And when I talk to Jerry Milner, who heads this up, he tells us it's coming. But so we will have totally closed out our first Child and Family Service review. And if you look at bottom of page 7, I just picked out some of the measures that we've improved on, just to give you a sense of what we've accomplished. The little arrow means which way did we want it to go. Did we want, the first number is where we were in our final report. The second number is where we were in our most recent data, and the arrow tells you, do you want to go up or down? So, for example, in timeliness of investigations, we've improved 10% from 73 to 83. In our repeat maltreatment, we wanted to go down, and we've been able to inch that down a little bit. In reentries, we've inched that down quite a bit. The one I want to particularly, about halfway to 2/3 down on the list, I want to call your attention to is that visits with children. And I mentioned this earlier, that was one where we really struggled, and we set our performance at 27%. And about, a year ago, Jerry Milner, again, the person who heads us up at the federal government, was here visiting with us to talk about how things were going. And at that point, we told him, we don't know if we can hit 27. We're doing everything we can, but we have really heavy caseloads. It's just really hard. And we exceeded, I think, anything any of us, 50% is not where we want to be in the end, but we certainly exceeded where we thought a year ago we could be. And that obviously has been our greatest area of improvement. One of the things I also just mention is if you look at those last 4, the visits with kids, visits with parents, doing good assessments and matching services to needs, and then engaging families in case planning. Those 4, one of the things the federal government has done is they've gone around and done all 50, is they've analyzed all the data they got from looking at data, administrative data from across the country, and then all these case reviews. And those 4 items are the ones they've identified have the highest relationship to improving the outcomes. And in some respects, that's not it's not surprising. It sort of makes sense in your gut that if you do good assessments, if you provide the services that match that, if you engage the families and see them regularly, you are more likely. And that's been confirmed. And that's where we've been then really, really concentrating, since those are really your leverage again. The last thing I'll mention on this slide is with the exception of the for the second and third one, they actually will measure our administrative data, and they've set a national standard that's sort of reflected at where the 75th percentile, where 75, so that 25% of the states are better than that, the rest are below, and that's what we're striving for. All the others, in our next review, the threshold is 95%. 95% of our cases need to be doing well on that item. And so on the data measures, it's the 75th percentile. Sort of if you think about, remember back in school when you had a curved for grade, you had to be at a certain, and so they're very, very high thresholds, which is why none of the states passed first go around, and everybody anticipates no one will pass second go around. But I think those of us in the states and in the federal government all believe that the kids and families deserve high standards. It's more important to set the standards high and work towards them than necessarily to set them so that states pass, because the issue is we want to get there. So the next piece then I'll go into is, because as soon as we finish up round one, we are, of course, preparing for round two. Do you have a question, Don?
Yeah, Mary, these improvements since round one are very good. How do you measure these? How do you measure, in any one, you might take any one for example, how do you measure that to see, and how do you measure it to find out if it's improved or not improved? Or
sure, Finn, that's an excellent question. Again, the way the review works, it's a mix of administrative data, which is data in our automated system on 100% of the cases, and then the on-site review, which is a sample. On those that we can use administrative data, and that includes like the repeat maltreatment and foster care reentries, we use the data from our system, and every quarter we run the data, and we run the program the same way the federal government does, so we have a sense of how does ours look. Repeat maltreatment is actually measured. We take a group of kids that had an incident of confirmed abuse, and then we look for 6 months later, and did they have another confirmed incident? And then they're going to count against us as a repeat maltreatment. Now, I should mention on that particular one, there are some sort of flaws in how the feds measure this, but it's measured the same across the country, so it's an equitable playing field. But right now, they use the data of the report. They are, at some point, may use the data of the incident, but they use the data of the report, which means if we get a report today, if we do, like last month, we confirm a report of abuse, so that's your start date. If 2 months from now, we find out that there was also maybe a sexual abuse a year ago, and we investigate that and we confirm it happened, the date of the report will, our first report date would be like May, our next report date is July. It's going to show up in this statistic as if it's a repeat maltreatment with the second report following, even though the incident was never known before and happened 2 years ago. That's just a function because they use the data of the report, and we investigate old incidents as well as current. Ultimately, I think their hope is to go to data of actual incidents, because what they're trying to measure is did the child get abused after you knew about them. All of the foster care reentry is measured. We look at of all the kids who entered care in a particular 12-month period, or a particular period, I should say, how many of them had been reunified in the prior 12 months. So they were in care, went home, and then sometime in the 12-month period they came back into care. The other ones that are on that list are measured through case reviews. And in the review itself, it's through that 50-case sample. What we do is we read cases every month, supervisors read, and we measure it the same way the federal government does. And we have a scoring tool, it's entered into a database, and then we have our quality assurance staff do a sample of read behind to validate that we're reading, that it's being measured correctly. And so we just do that every month, and then every quarter we report it out. And that's available to our staff, so supervisors can see that. Okay, so then going back again to page 8, on our second CFSR, We are starting, we anticipate the formal statewide assessment will be through June through November of 2008, and those are kind of estimates. We're actually starting now, though, to get input, and I mean, it's really kind of in a continual process, because we've got the routine data we just talked about. We are holding focus groups periodically. We have a child welfare stakeholder panel that meets every other month. We're getting their feedback on how are we doing on this stuff. So it's sort of an ongoing process, but our official statewide assessment period will be June through November of 2008. And our on-site review, we anticipate being sometime after January of 2009. So it'll be about, what is that, 6 years, somewhere between January. I would assume maybe by May, again, that spring, they'll come back out. Our final report we're supposed to receive 6 weeks after the on-site review. Hopefully, if you looked at the schedule last time, it took a little bit longer than that. And then our PIP is due 90 days after the final report. So we'll, and we'll be in a position, to keep you updated as we go forward on how do we think we're doing on these things. And we can talk, sometime in that June 2008, June to November, we can kind of tell you on what we're seeing in our statewide assessment. On the bottom, then I highlighted a little bit about what we know will be different in round 2, because one of the really good things too that the federal government did is they worked very closely with the states throughout the first round and identified what worked well, what didn't work so well. And a lot of that's been incorporated in what they'll do in the on-site, or in the second round. One of the things they're doing is adding cases. There was some concern that 50 wasn't a large enough sample, although it's still a fairly small sample, but they'll do 65 this time. There's going to be a greater focus on older children. As it turned out, older children didn't show up very much in the initial review, and they'll do more of a stratified sample so they can look at how are young kids doing, how are older children doing, how are kids that are in care short time doing, how about kids that are that age out, so they can try and see, but what are the different experiences of different groups of kids that are served by the child welfare system. Last time there was emphasis on collaboration with tribes in the court, but they're really stepping that up this time. So we'll be working very closely with our tribal partners, and we did last time with the court. We'll continue to do that, and then this time they're putting a much stronger emphasis on youth engagement. And we've been working with the Elevate group. We have members on our stakeholder panel, and we'll definitely want to work with them about playing a really strong role. And I was just at a meeting in Kansas City, and they talked about, in fact, having some of the youth actually hold the focus groups. So not just give input, but actually do some of the maybe write some of the sections, but have a very active ownership role in the process. They're doing more sophisticated analysis of data, and again, part of that is looking at subpopulations. Again, looking at, if you take something like repeat maltreatment or reentry into care, is it different for older kids, for little kids? Is it different for children of color than it is for white kids? So really trying to take that and analyze the data in a more sophisticated fashion. And they expect us to do a lot more analysis of our data. Not just what is the data, but why do we think the data? What do we think is causing? If we have, if our, whatever direction, wherever our repeat maltreatment rate is, why do we think it is what it is? Why do we think it's moving or not moving in the right direction? There's also considerably will be increased emphasis on fathers' involvement, and they started to do that in round 1. And one of the things they really saw, the more they began to pull the data together, was on almost all the performance measures, states did better with moms than they did with dads. So if you looked at something like visits, monthly contact with parent, there was a lot more frequent monthly contact with moms than there was with dads. If you looked at engagement and involvement in the case planning, moms were more involved than dads were. So they're really, and that's another way they're trying to disaggregate the data, look at, are we doing what we can as much as we need to? And we're really trying to partner, like with child support, they've got several fatherhood initiatives. We're trying to do a better job of sort of taking the lessons they've learned to do a better job engaging fathers. And then the other thing they'll look at is they'll really take a look at, okay, we said, and I went over some of our key strategies, those were the strategies we picked. Well, are you still implementing those strategies, and are they working? So that's kind of what we know today about how round 2 will be different. There's only, I think, 1 or 2 states that have gone through round 2 yet. In our region, Kansas has their review in June. One of the things that the federal government allows us to do that we are taking advantage of is we can send some of our staff to be peer reviewers. You remember I mentioned that some of the federal reviewers are actually people who work in other state systems. We have staff that will be reviewing other states because there is no better way to learn how this works than to actually be a reviewer in another state and get hands-on experience. And we did that in round 1 as well. The other thing we really learned in round 1 is not only is it helpful to learn about the review, but it's really helpful to look at how do other systems do things. You know, how does another state, what do they do to engage families? How are they working with dads? What kind of services do they have in place? We brought back a wealth of information that we can use to improve our own system. So, and then finally, on page 9 is just.
You're
in terms of summing up
viewing
CPI,
a presentation
provides
before the
really good framework
Iowa
for
Council
focusing
on
on
Human
those
Services
outcomes,
on evaluation
and
regarding
continuous quality
child
improvement.
welfare
It also provides a
practices
really
here in
strong
Iowa.
common
It sounds like
framework
everything is grand and glorious, and they're meeting all their goals, and they're working hard to include fathers, and they're working hard to do all kinds of things. Doesn't it seem strange that we would then have major problems such as we read at the earlier part of this program, where a child is taken away from a good, caring mother? Now, how does that work when you begin to evaluate? Or do we just look at the statistics on these things and talk about strategies? Shouldn't we focus on people, families, children? Apparently they're not doing that as a part of this overall thing. They're not involving individuals who are really hurt. They're going to foster care providers. They're going to other people who probably don't have much much insight as to the real problems. Well, here, let's go back to Mary Nelson, Department of Human Services, as she winds up her discussion.
Program improvement plan. In a number of areas, we've got a ways to go. That's, as I said earlier, the kids and families deserve the very best, and so they deserve us to set the standards high and continually work to get ourselves closer.
Does anyone have questions of Mary?
So, if you get your performance improvement, back.
A letter that says
Yeah.
you're good to go.
Good to go. Are you still expected to achieve the goals? I mean, you've made progress in every one.
Oh, absolutely. When they come back, they'll be judging us against the national standard on the data measures and on the onsite for 95%.
So
So
our plan is to keep.
we'll keep going. Yeah. So that 10 to 50 on visits was great, but we want to get to 95.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else for Mary? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you on that, and thanks for having me back. And like I said, I'd be happy to come back and kind of keep you posted as we go. One thing I think I've mentioned here before, but I just would mention again is on those 6 measures that have national standards, and that they use our data system to measure. That we have those now. We post every quarter on our DHS website, so anyone can go look at how well are we doing on the on those 6 national standards: the repeat maltreatment, reentry into care, timely reunification, timely adoption, placement stability, and safe abuse in foster care. And you can look at that by DHS service area, statewide, by judicial district. You can break down ages of kids. And I think we started that about a year or so ago. But we really want everybody in Iowa sort of to own that and hold all of us accountable to getting where we need to be.
Thank you for tuning in to the CPI report. Here's a couple of numbers that may be of help to you, and we will see you next week.